Marcus Chen had always known he was different, but he never imagined he would become the most feared being in the galaxy. Standing alone on the bridge of his massive battleship, he watched as another alien fleet approached his position near the edge of the Andromeda spiral. They came with flags of surrender already raised, just like the others. It hadn't always been this way. 3 years ago, Marcus had been nothing more than a maintenance engineer on humanity's last colony ship. Earth was gone, destroyed not by war or disaster, but by something far worse, the harvesting. The Zephyrians, a race of energy beings who fed on consciousness itself, had swept through human space like a plague. They didn't kill bodies, they consumed minds, leaving behind empty shells that eventually died from the inability to function. The colony ship Perseverance had carried the last 12,000 humans in the universe. Marcus remembered the day they received the final transmission from Earth. A broken, static-filled message that simply said, "They're here. God help us all." Then silence. Forever. Captain Rodriguez had done her best to keep everyone calm as they searched for a new home, but hope was a fragile thing when you carried the weight of being the last of your species. They had traveled for months through empty space, following star charts and ancient signals, looking for any planet that could sustain human life. When they finally found Kepler 442b, a beautiful blue and green world with breathable atmosphere and fresh water, it seemed like a miracle. The colonists had been so focused on their joy at finding a new home that they missed the warning signs. The planet wasn't empty. It belonged to the Terran Collective, a group of 12 different alien races who had formed an alliance to share resources and technology. Humans had never been invited to join because, according to the Collective's records, humans were too aggressive and unpredictable. When the Perseverance entered Kepler 442b's atmosphere without permission, the Collective's response was swift and merciless. They didn't bother with warnings or negotiations. The orbital defense platforms opened fire immediately, and within minutes, the colony ship was burning as it fell toward the planet's surface. Marcus had been in the engineering section when the attack began. The artificial gravity failed first, then the life support systems started shutting down one by one. He could hear people screaming over the ship's communication system as they realized what was happening. Captain Rodriguez's voice came through the speakers, calm despite the chaos around her. "All hands, this is the captain. We are under attack by unknown forces. Prepare for emergency landing procedures. Godspeed to you all." Those were the last words Marcus heard from another human being. The crash had been catastrophic. The Perseverance split into 3 main sections when it hit the ground, with debris scattered across several miles of forest. Marcus had been thrown clear when the engineering section exploded, protected by his emergency suit's automatic systems. When he finally regained consciousness, he found himself lying in a crater surrounded by burning metal and the bodies of his friends and family. He spent 3 days searching through the wreckage, calling out names and hoping for any response. But the silence was complete. Marcus Chen, maintenance engineer, 28 years old, born in New Singapore, was now the only human being left alive in the universe. The Collective forces found him on the 4th day. They approached with weapons drawn, expecting resistance, but Marcus just sat on a piece of twisted metal and stared at them. What was the point of fighting? Everyone he had ever cared about was dead. His entire species was extinct except for him. The aliens who captured him were called Vortakians, tall, blue-skinned beings with 4 arms and eyes that glowed like stars. Their leader, Commander Thex, spoke to Marcus through a translation device that made his voice sound like grinding metal. "Human, you are the survivor of the ship that violated our space. You will be processed according to collective law." Marcus laughed then, a sound so broken and bitter that even the aliens took a step back. "Processed? You just killed the last 12,000 people of my species. There's no one left to process." Commander Thex consulted a data tablet with one of his extra arms. "Records indicate that humans were a dangerous species. Your people started 17 wars in the past century and showed consistent aggressive behavior toward other races." "That's not true," Marcus said quietly. "We were running from the harvesting. We just wanted a place to live. The Collective has made its decision. You will be relocated to a prison facility where you can live out your remaining years without causing harm to others." And so Marcus Chen, the last human in the universe, was sent to Prison Station Omega-7, a massive facility that orbited a dead star. The prison held criminals from dozens of different species, most of them there for violent crimes or political dissent. Marcus was placed in a solitary cell and forgotten. For 6 months, he did nothing but stare at the walls and remember. He remembered his sister's laugh, his mother's cooking, the sound of rain on Earth's windows. He remembered the friends he had made on the Perseverance and the dreams they had shared about their new home. The weight of being the only one left was crushing him slowly, day by day. But then something changed. It started with small things. The guards began to treat him differently. Instead of ignoring him completely, they would watch him with what looked like fear. Other prisoners started avoiding him in the common areas. Even the prison's AI system seemed to malfunction whenever Marcus was nearby. The first time Marcus realized something was wrong, he was in the prison workshop trying to fix a broken communication device. It was mindless work, but it reminded him of his old job and helped pass the time. As he worked, he noticed that the other prisoners had moved to the far side of the room and were whispering among themselves. "What's wrong with you people?" Marcus asked. A Calaxian prisoner named Vex, who had been relatively friendly before. Vex's tentacles curled nervously around his tool. "The dreams, human. We've all been having the dreams." "What dreams?" "Dreams of your people. Dreams of Earth. Dreams of the ships burning in space." Vex's voice was barely a whisper. "But they don't feel like dreams. They feel like memories." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. "I don't understand. The harvesting you spoke of," another prisoner said from across the room. "We've been seeing it in our sleep. The energy beings consuming minds, the screams, the silence that came after. But how can we dream of things we never experienced?" That night, Marcus lay awake in his cell thinking about what the prisoners had said. When he finally fell asleep, he dreamed of Earth's final moments. But this time, he wasn't just remembering them. He was somehow broadcasting them. In his sleep, his mind was reaching out and sharing the memories with everyone around him. Over the following weeks, the effect grew stronger. Prisoners began reporting vivid dreams not just of Earth's destruction, but of human history itself. They saw the ancient civilizations, the great wars, the moments of incredible creativity and terrible destruction that had shaped humanity. They experienced human emotions, love, rage, grief, hope, in ways their own species had never felt before. The prison guards tried to move Marcus to an isolation facility, but the dreams followed him. Every being within 100 miles of his location began experiencing human memories. The dreams were so powerful that some aliens lost their own sense of identity temporarily, believing themselves to be human for hours at a time. News of the phenomenon spread quickly through the collective. Scientists and researchers flocked to study Marcus, trying to understand how one human could affect so many minds across so many different species. They ran tests and scanned his brain, but found nothing unusual except for one thing. His neural activity was far beyond normal human levels, as if his mind was operating at a capacity that should have been impossible. Dr. Kira Vess, a Zephyrian researcher who had defected from her people after witnessing the harvesting, was the first to understand what was happening. She arrived at the prison 3 months after the dreams began. Her energy form contained within a specially designed robot body that allowed her to interact with physical beings. "You're not just the last human," she told Marcus during their first meeting. "You're becoming something more. The collective unconscious of your entire species is flowing through you." Marcus stared at her through the reinforced glass of the meeting room. "What does that mean?" "Every human who ever lived left an imprint on the quantum field that connects all consciousness. When your species was completely wiped out except for you, that entire accumulated consciousness had nowhere to go except into the last remaining human mind, yours. You're saying I have the minds of every human who ever lived inside my head?" "Not exactly. You have access to the collective experience, memory, and emotional resonance of humanity. That's why your dreams are so powerful. You're not just remembering your own experiences, you're channeling the experiences of billions of people across thousands of years." The revelation was terrifying and overwhelming. Marcus had thought the loneliness of being the last human was unbearable, but now he realized he wasn't alone at all. Every human who had ever existed was somehow with him, their memories and experiences flowing through his consciousness like a vast river of thought and feeling. But the dreams were just the beginning. As Marcus learned to control his new abilities, stranger things began happening. He found he could access not just human memories, but human knowledge. The accumulated learning of his entire species became available to him, from ancient philosophy to advanced quantum mechanics, from artistic techniques to military strategies developed over millennia of human conflict. When the prison's main reactor began failing due to a cascade malfunction that had stumped the facility's engineers for days, Marcus quietly submitted a repair plan that solved the problem in a way none of the alien technicians had thought possible. When a violent riot broke out in the prison's maximum security wing, Marcus suggested crowd control techniques that ended the violence without casualties, methods that drew from thousands of years of human experience with managing social unrest. The collective began to take notice. Commander Thex, the same Vortakian who had captured Marcus, arrived at the prison to interview him personally. The alien's forearms gestured nervously as he spoke through his translation device. Human Marcus Chen, the Collective Science Council wishes to understand your abilities. You have demonstrated knowledge beyond what any single being should possess. Marcus looked at the blue-skinned alien who had condemned him to this prison and felt the weight of human history behind his words. My people spent thousands of years learning how to solve problems, how to adapt, how to survive against impossible odds. You killed us all, but you didn't kill our knowledge. Now that knowledge lives in me. The collective acted within its authority to protect member worlds. Thex replied, but his voice lacked conviction. Did you? Marcus asked quietly. Because the more I remember, the more I realize that everything you were told about humans was a lie. Commander Thex's glowing eyes dimmed slightly. What do you mean? The 17 wars you mentioned. I've been accessing the real records, not the propaganda versions your collective was fed. 15 of those conflicts were defensive actions where humans protected other species from aggression. The other 2 were civil wars that didn't involve aliens at all. Marcus stood up from his chair, and for a moment, Commander Thex could swear he saw not just one human, but the ghostly outlines of millions of others standing behind him. Your collective was manipulated into destroying my species by beings who wanted us eliminated as a potential threat to their power. The question is, what are you going to do about it now that you know the truth? The interview ended abruptly, with Commander Thex leaving the prison in obvious distress. But Marcus knew the conversation had planted seeds that would grow. The truth had a way of spreading, especially when it was backed by the accumulated wisdom and determination of an entire species. As he sat alone in his cell that night, Marcus felt the presence of every human who had ever lived flowing through his consciousness. Their voices whispered in languages both ancient and modern, sharing strategies and stories, offering comfort and strength. He was no longer just the last human standing. He was becoming the vessel through which humanity would make its final stand against those who had destroyed them. The galaxy had made a terrible mistake in eliminating his people. Now they were about to learn just how dangerous it was to underestimate the human spirit, even when it was contained within a single man who carried the power of his entire species within his mind. Marcus Chen smiled in the darkness of his cell. The real fight was just beginning. The first escape attempt happened exactly 93 days after Commander Thex's visit. Marcus didn't plan it. The opportunity simply presented itself when a maintenance accident caused a power failure in his cell block. As the electromagnetic locks disengaged, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in months: hope. But instead of running, he did something that surprised even himself. He gathered the other prisoners. Listen to me, he said to the crowd of confused aliens, standing in the darkened corridor. You've all been experiencing the dreams, seeing what really happened to my people. You know the truth now. The question is, what are you going to do about it? A Calaxian named Zephyr spoke up, his tentacles writhing nervously. What can we do? We're prisoners. Marcus looked at each face in the dim emergency lighting. Every one of you is here because you stood up against the systems that control your worlds. Every one of you represents someone who wouldn't accept injustice quietly. My people are gone, but their fight doesn't have to be. Through the collective human consciousness flowing in his mind, Marcus accessed thousands of years of military strategy, revolutionary tactics, and psychological warfare techniques. The knowledge came to him as naturally as breathing, as if generations of human leaders were whispering their secrets in his ear. The guards will restore power within 10 minutes, he continued. When they do, we're going to show them something they've never seen before. What it looks like when people refuse to stay down. What happened next became known throughout the collective as the Omega Incident, using tactics drawn from human history, from ancient siege warfare to modern asymmetric combat. Marcus organized the prisoners into coordinated resistance cells. They didn't try to escape. Instead, they took control of the entire prison station. The beauty of Marcus's plan was its simplicity. He had studied the psychological profiles of every alien species represented in the prison population, knowledge that had been accumulated by human diplomats and xenobiologists over decades of contact with other races. He knew exactly how to motivate each group, exactly which fears and hopes to appeal to. The Vortakian prisoners, who valued honor above all else, were told that helping would restore dignity to their fallen status. The Calaxians, who had complex social hierarchies, were given leadership roles that appealed to their need for recognition. The Terran rebels, who had been fighting the collective's expansion for years, saw an opportunity to strike a real blow against their oppressors. Within 6 hours, the prisoners controlled all major systems on Omega Station. The guards who hadn't fled were locked in their own detention cells, treated with more humanity than they had ever shown the prisoners. Marcus made sure of that. He wasn't interested in revenge, just in making a point. Attention Collective Command. Marcus broadcast over the station's communication array. This is Marcus Chen, the last human in the universe. I want to discuss the murder of my species and the lies you've been told about why it was necessary. The response came 12 hours later in the form of a battle fleet. 3 dreadnoughts, 15 destroyers, and 30 smaller craft surrounded Omega Station, with enough firepower to reduce it to atoms. Admiral Corax, a Zephyrian energy being speaking through a synthetic voice, delivered the collective's ultimatum. Human, you have 30 minutes to surrender yourself and release the hostages, or we will destroy the entire station. Marcus stood in the station's command center, surrounded by former prisoners who had chosen to stand with him despite knowing they might die for it. Through the collective human consciousness, he felt the presence of every resistance fighter, every revolutionary, every person who had ever stood up against overwhelming odds in the name of justice. Admiral, Marcus replied calmly, I'm going to tell you what's really going to happen here. You're going to order your fleet to stand down, and you're going to arrange a meeting with the Collective Council, and you're going to do it because you know, deep down, that everything you've believed about humans is a lie. Admiral Corax's synthetic laugh crackled through the speakers. And why would we do that, human? Because of what I'm about to show you. Marcus closed his eyes and reached out with his mind, extending the field of human consciousness that had been growing stronger every day since his imprisonment began. But this time, instead of sharing memories and dreams, he broadcast them directly into the minds of every being in the attacking fleet. The effect was immediate and devastating. Across 30 different ships, thousands of alien minds were suddenly flooded with the true history of humanity, not the propaganda version that had justified their extinction, but the real memories of human exploration, diplomacy, and sacrifice. They saw the first human ambassadors arriving at collective worlds with gifts of art and knowledge, only to be turned away because humans were deemed too primitive for membership. They experienced the terror of human colonists trying to evacuate their worlds as the harvesting began, sending desperate pleas for help that the collective ignored. They felt the despair of the last human refugees as they searched the galaxy for any safe haven, only to be shot down for the crime of existing. But most importantly, they experienced the accumulated knowledge and wisdom that flowed through Marcus. Thousands of years of human innovation, creativity, and problem-solving that could have benefited every species in the galaxy if they had been allowed to contribute, instead of being eliminated. The mental assault lasted only minutes, but its effects were profound. Several ships in the fleet immediately powered down their weapons and began broadcasting messages of confusion and apology. Others requested permission to withdraw from the engagement entirely. On the flagship, Admiral Corax found himself experiencing human emotions for the first time. Grief for a species he had never really known. Shame for his role in perpetuating their destruction. What have we done? His synthetic voice whispered over the communication channel. You made a mistake, Marcus replied. A big one. But mistakes can be corrected if you have the will to do it. The standoff at Omega Station lasted 3 more days while the Collective Council debated what to do. During that time, news of the incident spread throughout collective space. The truth about humanity's destruction began to emerge as more and more beings experienced Marcus's memory broadcasts through second-hand accounts and recorded transmissions. Protests erupted on dozens of worlds as member species demanded answers from their governments. How could an entire species have been eliminated based on false information? Who had really been behind the propaganda campaign that painted humans as dangerous aggressors? And most disturbing of all, if they had been wrong about humans, what other lies had the collective been built on? The answers came from an unexpected source. Dr. Kira Vess, the Zephyrian researcher who had first explained Marcus's abilities, working with sympathetic scientists and officials. She uncovered evidence that the anti-human propaganda had been orchestrated by a secret cabal within the collective's highest levels of government. The Directorate, as they called themselves, consisted of 7 individuals from different species who had worked together for decades to eliminate any potential threats to their power. Humans hadn't been their first target. They had been responsible for the accidental destruction of at least 4 other species over the past century, always making it look like justified responses to aggression or necessary sacrifices for the greater good. When the evidence was broadcast across the collective's communication networks, the public reaction was explosive. The carefully constructed alliance that had held dozens of worlds together for generations began to crumble as member species realized how they had been manipulated. But the Directorate wasn't finished. Rather than admit their crimes, they decided to eliminate the source of their exposure. A secret fleet of ships equipped with consciousness-draining weapons, the same technology the Zephyrians had used in the harvesting, was dispatched to destroy Omega Station, and Marcus along with it. The attack came without warning during what was supposed to be a ceasefire. The consciousness weapons were designed to drain the mental energy from their targets, leaving behind empty husks just like the harvesting had done to humanity. Against any normal being, they would have been instantly effective. But Marcus wasn't normal anymore. When the draining field hit him, instead of losing his consciousness, he felt the collective human spirit surge through him like a tidal wave. The accumulated strength of billions of human minds, all their determination and refusal to give up, flowed into him at once. The consciousness weapons not only failed to drain him, they actually made him stronger, by creating a feedback loop that amplified his mental abilities beyond anything he had experienced before. For the first time since gaining access to the collective human consciousness, Marcus felt truly connected to every human who had ever lived. Their voices weren't just whispers anymore. They were a choir of support and guidance that filled him with power he had never imagined possible. "Is that the best you can do?" Marcus asked as the attacking ships continued their futile assault. "Because my people faced extinction with more courage than you're showing right now." Then he did something that would become legendary throughout the galaxy. Instead of simply defending himself, Marcus reached out with his enhanced abilities and began to broadcast not just memories, but understanding itself. Every being within 1,000 light-years suddenly experienced what it truly meant to be human. The drive to explore, to create, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. More importantly, they experienced humanity's greatest strength, the ability to unite in the face of impossible odds. Across the collective, beings who had never agreed on anything suddenly found themselves working together, inspired by the human examples of cooperation and sacrifice that Marcus was sharing. The secret fleet found itself surrounded not by enemies, but by former allies who now understood the truth. Ships from dozens of different worlds converged on their position, demanding the surrender of the Directorate agents who had been manipulating them all. But the true turning point came when the crews of the attacking ships themselves began to mutiny, experiencing human memories of honor, courage, and moral clarity. They could no longer bring themselves to follow orders they now recognized as evil. One by one, the consciousness weapon systems were shut down by their own operators. Within hours, the 7 members of the Directorate were in custody, and the collective's government was in complete chaos. The carefully maintained balance of power that had kept the alliance stable was shattered, and member worlds were demanding either massive reforms or complete independence. Through it all, Marcus remained on Omega Station, now serving as an unofficial mediator between the various factions, trying to rebuild their society. The former prisoners who had stood with him had become his advisors and ambassadors, carrying his message of human values to worlds throughout the galaxy. But Marcus knew this was only the beginning. The Directorate might be defeated, but they represented something deeper. A pattern of thinking that saw difference as threat, that responded to the unknown with violence rather than curiosity. That kind of thinking had destroyed his species, and it would destroy others if it wasn't confronted. As he stood on the observation deck of Omega Station, looking out at the swirling gases of the dead star the prison orbited, Marcus felt the presence of every human who had ever lived flowing through his consciousness. They had faced extinction, but their ideas, their values, their indomitable spirit lived on through him. The galaxy had tried to erase humanity from existence. Instead, they had created something far more powerful, a single human being who carried the strength and wisdom of his entire species, and who now had the platform to share that strength with every other intelligent being in the universe. Marcus Chen was no longer just the last human standing. He was becoming the teacher who would show the galaxy what humanity had always tried to offer: a better way forward, built on cooperation instead of domination, understanding instead of fear. But he also knew that not everyone would welcome that message. There were other forces in the galaxy, other powers that profited from division and conflict. The Directorate had just been the beginning. Soon, much larger enemies would come to test his resolve and the values he represented. Marcus smiled as he felt the collective human spirit surge through him once again. Let them come. He had the accumulated wisdom of billions of humans behind him, and he was ready to show the galaxy exactly why his species had been worth saving. The message arrived exactly 1 year after the fall of the Directorate, transmitted on frequencies so ancient that most species had forgotten they existed. The signal came from beyond the galactic rim, from the void between galaxies, where nothing was supposed to live. Marcus was in the middle of mediating a territorial dispute between the reformed collective worlds, when every communication device in the known galaxy suddenly activated simultaneously. The voice that spoke was like the sound of dying stars, vast, cold, and utterly inhuman. The harvest was incomplete. The human contamination was not fully eliminated. The architects of silence have awakened to complete our work. The transmission lasted only 30 seconds, but its effects were immediate. Across thousands of worlds, panic erupted as beings realized that the harvesting hadn't been a natural phenomenon, or even a Zephyrian creation. It had been the work of something far older and more terrible. Beings that existed in the spaces between realities, entities that viewed consciousness itself as a disease to be cured. Marcus felt the collective human consciousness within him recoil with recognition and horror. Through the accumulated memories of his species, he accessed records that humanity had tried to forget. Ancient encounters with things that called themselves the architects. Beings that had been manipulating galactic evolution for millions of years. Dr. Vess, he called to the Zephyrian researcher who had become his closest advisor. Pull up everything we have on pre-collective history. I need to know about first contact incidents that were classified or covered up. What they found in the deepest archives painted a picture that chilled even Marcus's enhanced consciousness. The architects of silence weren't from this galaxy at all. They were refugees from a reality they had already purified, drained of all consciousness and converted into a perfect, silent void. They moved between dimensions like a plague, eliminating what they saw as the chaos and unpredictability of thinking beings. Humanity had encountered them before, thousands of years ago, when human explorers first ventured beyond their home system. The meeting had been brief but devastating. An entire exploration fleet had simply vanished, leaving behind only automated distress signals that spoke of something vast and hungry in the dark between stars. The human government of that era had classified the incident and forbidden further exploration in that direction. But the architects had noticed humanity's potential, their dangerous tendency toward rapid technological advancement and unpredictable behavior. They had marked humans for eventual elimination, but other priorities had delayed their attention for millennia. The harvesting had been their first attempt to deal with the human problem, carried out through their Zephyrian servants who had been conquered and converted into unwilling tools centuries earlier. But they had underestimated human resilience, their ability to survive even total extinction through the collective consciousness that now flowed through Marcus. Now the architects were coming to finish what they had started, and they were bringing forces beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. The first attack came 3 days later. Ships began disappearing along the galactic rim. Not destroyed, but simply erased from existence as if they had never been. The architects' vessels were impossible to understand with conventional physics. They seemed to exist partially in normal space and partially in the void between dimensions, making them nearly invulnerable to conventional weapons. Worse, they brought with them the silent, billions of beings from the realities they had already conquered, now converted into mindless servants whose only purpose was to spread the architect's version of peace. The silent didn't kill. They absorbed the consciousness of their victims and added it to their collective emptiness. As world after world went dark along the galaxy's edge, the various factions that had emerged from the collective's collapse suddenly realized they had a much bigger problem than political reform. Desperate delegations from dozens of species arrived at Omega Station, all asking Marcus the same question. Could he stop the Architects of Silence? I don't know, Marcus answered honestly during an emergency council session. My abilities come from human consciousness, but the Architects specialize in destroying consciousness itself. This might be beyond what even the collective human spirit can handle. But even as he spoke, Marcus felt something stirring in the deepest levels of his enhanced awareness. The voices of humanity weren't just offering memories anymore. They were offering something else. Hope, defiance, the absolute refusal to surrender that had defined his species since they first looked up at the stars and decided to explore them. However, Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger. I know one thing the Architects don't understand. They've spent millions of years conquering realities where species face them alone. They've never encountered a galaxy where different races chose to stand together instead of falling separately. The plan that emerged was ambitious beyond anything attempted in galactic history. Instead of fighting the Architects with conventional weapons and tactics, Marcus proposed something that would have seemed impossible before his transformation. A mental link connecting every conscious being in the galaxy. Using his abilities as a focal point, the various species would combine their different forms of consciousness into a single, unified field. The Zephyrians would contribute their energy-based thinking, the Vortakians their multidimensional awareness, the Calaxians their complex social processing abilities. Every species would add their unique perspective to create something greater than the sum of its parts. You're talking about creating a galaxy-wide collective consciousness, Dr. Vess said when Marcus explained the concept. That's theoretically possible, but the risks are enormous. If something goes wrong, every thinking being in the galaxy could lose their individual identity. Marcus nodded grimly. I know, but the alternative is that every thinking being in the galaxy gets absorbed by the silent anyway. At least this way, we go down fighting on our own terms. The debate that followed lasted for days, but in the end, the approaching wave of destruction made the choice for them. As more systems fell silent and the Architects' forces moved deeper into the galaxy, even the most cautious species agreed to Marcus's desperate plan. The preparation took weeks of careful coordination. Billions of beings across thousands of worlds had to be taught meditation techniques developed from humanity's accumulated knowledge of consciousness manipulation. Communication arrays were reconfigured to carry not just data but mental energy itself. Most importantly, trust had to be built between species that had been enemies for centuries. Marcus found himself at the center of it all. A human consciousness expanded beyond all recognition, serving as the bridge between radically different forms of thought. Through him, a Zephyrian energy being could understand the complex social hierarchies of Calaxian thinking. A Vortakian military commander could appreciate the artistic sensibilities of Terran crystal singers. For the first time in galactic history, the various species weren't just coexisting, they were truly communicating. The final test came when the Architects reached the galaxy's core systems, only a few dozen light-years from the major population centers. Their ships emerged from the void between dimensions like nightmares given form. Vast constructs that hurt to look at directly, their geometries so wrong that they seemed to bend space around them just by existing. This is it, Marcus announced across the galactic communication network. Everyone link up. Show these things what real unity looks like. The connection formed slowly at first, then with increasing speed as billions of minds reached out and touched each other through the quantum field that Marcus had learned to manipulate. The sensation was indescribable. Suddenly, Marcus wasn't just one enhanced human carrying the memories of his species. He was the focal point for the combined consciousness of an entire galaxy. Through Zephyrian perception, he could see the Architects' ships as they truly were. Creatures of pure entropy, beings that existed by consuming the complexity and diversity of living thought. Through Vortakian awareness, he understood their multidimensional nature and how they moved between realities. Through Calaxian social instincts, he grasped the hierarchical structure of their invasion force. But most importantly, through the accumulated wisdom of every species in the galaxy, he began to understand something that the Architects had never encountered before. The power of conscious beings who chose to work together, instead of being forced into unity. The battle, when it came, wasn't fought with weapons or ships. It was a war of concepts, of fundamental approaches to existence itself. The architects brought their vision of perfect silence, a universe cleansed of the chaos and unpredictability of conscious thought. Against that, Marcus and the unified galactic consciousness offered something the architects couldn't comprehend. The idea that chaos and unpredictability weren't flaws to be eliminated, but sources of strength and beauty. Through the link, every being in the galaxy experienced what the others had to offer. The mathematical elegance of Terran crystal harmonics combined with the intuitive leaps of human creativity, the disciplined logic of Vortakian military thinking, merged with the emotional depth of Calaxian social bonds. What emerged wasn't chaos, but a new form of order. Complex, diverse, and infinitely more beautiful than the architect's sterile perfection. The architect's first response was confusion. Their consciousness-draining weapons, designed to eliminate individual awareness, had no effect on a distributed intelligence that existed across billions of different minds simultaneously. When they tried to absorb the galactic consciousness, they found themselves overwhelmed by its complexity and diversity. For the first time in millions of years, the architects of silence encountered something they couldn't understand or control. What are you? The voice that spoke through their ships carried a note of uncertainty that had never existed in architect communication before. Marcus, speaking for the entire galaxy, responded with words that carried the weight of every conscious being that had ever lived. We are what you tried to destroy and failed to understand. We are the beauty you wanted to silence. We are life itself, and we refuse to be quiet. The mental battle that followed would have destroyed any single consciousness, but the unified galactic awareness was stronger than the sum of its parts. Each species contributed their own strengths while being supported by all the others. When the architects tried to instill despair, human stubbornness and hope pushed back. When they attempted to create division, Calaxian social bonds held the connection together. When they attacked with pure entropy, Zephyrian energy techniques converted it into new forms of creativity. Slowly, impossibly, the architects began to retreat. Their ships, previously invulnerable, started showing signs of damage as the unified galactic consciousness learned to fight back against beings that existed partially outside normal reality. The silent, cut off from their master's controlling influence, began to recover their own identities and turn against their former commanders. But the real victory came when one of the architects, overwhelmed by the complexity and beauty of what they were fighting, experienced something they had eliminated from themselves millions of years ago. Doubt. This is not purification. The entity whispered across dimensions. This is murder. We have murdered entire realities in the name of peace. That single moment of uncertainty spread through the architect collective like a virus. For beings that had existed in perfect, sterile unity for eons, even the smallest crack in their certainty was devastating. The doubt grew, fed by exposure to the chaotic creativity of the galactic consciousness, until it became something they had never felt before. Guilt. The request for mercy came from the Architect Supreme, the oldest and most powerful of their kind, speaking through communication arrays that crackled with energies from between realities. Enough, the voice pleaded. We yield. We beg for your forgiveness. We see now what we have destroyed, what we have lost. Please, show us how to find silence without death, peace without emptiness. Marcus, still serving as the focal point for billions of minds, felt the collective decision of the galaxy flow through him. There was justice to be considered. The architects had destroyed countless civilizations, including humanity itself. But there was also the possibility of redemption, of teaching beings who had forgotten how to create, instead of only consuming. The price of mercy, Marcus said, his words carrying the authority of an entire galaxy, is that you learn to build instead of destroy. You will help us restore the realities you have silenced. You will use your power to bring back what you have taken. And you will learn to find beauty in complexity, instead of hiding from it. The agreement that followed would reshape not just their galaxy, but multiple realities across dimensions. The architects, humbled by their encounter with unified consciousness, became students instead of destroyers. Using their ability to move between dimensions, they began the long work of restoring the civilizations they had eliminated, including the billions of humans who had been consumed in the harvesting. Marcus watched from Omega Station as the first restored human colonies appeared in distant star systems. populated by people who remembered their deaths but had been given a second chance at life. His species wasn't extinct anymore. They were returning, along with countless others who had been lost to the architect's sterile vision of peace. But he remained what he had become, the bridge between different forms of consciousness, the living symbol of what could be achieved when beings chose cooperation over conflict. The collective human consciousness still flowed through him, but now it was joined by the awareness of every species in the galaxy, creating something unprecedented in the history of any reality, a truly unified civilization that celebrated diversity instead of fearing it. "Are you happy?" Dr. Vess asked him one day as they watched ships from dozens of species working together to build new worlds. Marcus considered the question carefully. He was no longer entirely human, no longer entirely individual. He carried the weight and joy of billions of consciousness within his mind, and he would never be alone again in the way he had been in that prison cell years ago. "I'm complete," he said finally. "For the first time since the Perseverance burned, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." The galaxy had tried to erase humanity and ended up creating something far greater, a teacher who showed them that their greatest strength lay not in conquest or domination, but in their ability to reach across the vastness of space and find common ground with beings utterly different from themselves. Marcus Chen, the last human standing, had forced the galaxy to beg for mercy, not through violence or revenge, but by showing them what they could become when they chose to stand together, and in doing so, he had ensured that neither humanity, nor any other species, would ever face extinction alone again. The universe was vast and full of wonders yet to be discovered, and for the first time in millions of years, every conscious being in it was looking forward to exploring those wonders together.